Hot Springs Village Inside Out is a closer look at the greatness of Hot Springs Village, Arkansas and the surrounding areas. People, places, experiences. Hot Springs Village is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host Dennis Simpson as we engage in weekly conversations to explore Hot Springs Village Inside Out. Today's show is brought to you by Central Arkansas's favorite radio station, KVRE. Find them on the dial at 92.9 FM. Stream them live at kvre.com. RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village. The award-winning RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village is the largest real estate office inside the village with over 30 full-time agents and support staff. Visit them to learn more about this beautiful place to solve your real estate needs. Call them today at 1-800-364-9007. Find them online at explorehsv.com. They are RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village at 1-800-364-9007 or online at explorehsv.com. Ike Eisenhower State Farm. Ike and his award-winning team have been serving the insurance needs of folks all around Hot Springs Village since 1998. Ike has qualified for State Farm's President's Club, Chairman's Circle, and Hot Springs Village Insurance Agent of the Year. Call Ike Eisenhower State Farm today at 501-984-4100. That's 501-984-4100. Find them online at ikeeisenhower.net. Call them today for all your insurance needs because, like a good neighbor, Ike Eisenhower State Farm is there.
With another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, myself, and it's wonderful to have great friends. Jerry Garganuous, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing good, and it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. We see each other, hadn't seen each other in years, but we see each other now. And to those of you that know Gar, and that's what everybody knows him as, is Gar. And a South Arkansas term is a Gar, but Garganuous is a Greek. What is that?
It is Greek, Dennis.
So, wow. So, Jerry, let's set this up. You're in Pine Bluff. You're not in Pine Bluff. You've worked in Pine Bluff for a long time. You were a fireman and then became a fire investigator. And, we've unfortunately had some fires here in the village lately, and I wanted to talk with you about what an inspector sees. But, Jerry, last time you were over at my house in love, you looked at me square in the eye and you said, Dennis, you need more you need more smoke detectors. You need a new smoke detector. And I mean, it's not just a job for you. This is what you're concerned about fire prevention, right, Jerry?
Well, Dennis, it's not just me. I think any fireman, I think they start with fire prevention, and fire safety, because, we see the big red trucks, and all the, the water and the hoses and all that stuff. But it all starts with fire prevention, because if we can prevent a fire from happening, then we don't have to do that, because when a fire happens, Dennis, as well as me, that's probably the worst day of someone's life,
Yeah.
Properties being lost, and possibly lives. It's just destruction that, hopefully no one ever has to go through.
Well, you guys literally see that on a daily basis. So, it's easy to be more oriented toward prevention when you see what the end result can be. I can imagine driving an ambulance and knowing, hey, and probably not a good idea to smoke, you're picking up smokers all the time, But let me go back to that just for a sec, Jerry, for prevention. And actually for firemen, I can see where prevention is more the way. But, Jerry, you told me one time that if a fire department pulls up at your site and they don't have it completely out in 15 minutes, you got a real problem. I mean, they usually can knock it out or not. Is that about right?
I think that's a good point, Dennis. They train a lot. They go to school. They really have state-of-the-art equipment anymore. Technology has helped us a lot. And you're right, Dennis. If when you jump on a fire with the equipment you got and everything works as it should, you're going to knock a normal house fire out really quick. So.
Well, what do you see? What's the most common source of ignition? I mean, what is it? What obviously We need a smoke detector. I'll tell you what, let's dive in even deeper, Jerry, since I've got you here. What kind of smoke detectors are there?
Okay, Dennis, that's a great question. Because the other thing about it is we go back to common sense a lot of times, but still, we even go back to the grade school level. You probably remember in school, where the fireman came, and taught you how to stop, drop, and roll,
Mhm.
all the things like that. The firemen still do that. We still do it annually, Dennis. Uh, and one of the reasons for that was because of the fire in Chicago, and I think it was 1870 or 1871. They call it the Great Fire in Chicago. Over 300 lives were lost. This is actually, it was just a freak thing. The Midwest had a dry condition that time. A fire started, and the winds and everything just overwhelmed their resources. And 300 lives lost and stuff. And it actually happened. I think it was on October 8th. And October 8th, now the week of that October, is now what has become Fire Prevention Week in the United States.
Really? Well, and so the old phrase, Mrs. O'Leary's cow or whatever, but it it burned hundreds of blocks, and then literally made its own inferno and started sucking air up inside of it. And I mean, by that time, it's not a 15-minute job. It's just we just have to just wait till the devastation ends, right?
Dennis, they actually, I actually reiterated or researched a little bit, some on it last night. There was actually, I think, the fire burnt for over 36 hours, and actually a cool front came in, and rain helped put the fire out.
Or it might have gone a whole lot longer, right?
It had overwhelmed their resources.
Well, no, back to the smoke detector. There's, and I'm so naive here, but there's like smoke detectors that see particles between the electrons. It's got a little light, and then there's others that are like pre-ozone, or it smells when the fire is kind of going. What are those, and what do we need?
Yeah, there's different kinds, Dennis, but the main thing is to have a smoke detector. The different kinds of stuff. I'm not as versed maybe as I probably should be on that, but the main thing is have one, and have one outside every living quarters in your house. If you're in multi-level structures, make sure you have them on all the levels. Where they can be heard. Test them often and change the batteries. At least twice a year. Test them at least once a month and change the battery twice a year. But Dennis, another thing in Pine Bluff, and I'm sure a lot of cities have had the same opportunities. We had partnered with the American Red Cross here in Pine Bluff, and they provided us smoke detectors to give to the citizens of Pine Bluff.
For free?
And what they had at that time, Dennis, and I've been retired for 4 years now, but at the time, they were providing us with 10-year smoke detectors. It's just unheard of.
10-year battery in the smoke detector?
10-year life of a smoke detector. You put them up and call me back in 10 years, Dennis.
Wow.
It was just really a wow moment. And so, like I say, can't speak for all jurisdictions and stuff, but in Pine Bluff, they had that opportunity, and all they had to do is call the local fire department. We would come out and install it for them. And like I said, call us back in 10 years. You still want to come by, and do your monthly checks. Press to make it work and stuff. But in 10-year batteries life.
Well, and let's go back to this, Jerry. So you were a fireman how many years?
32.
32, and they only had to drag your unconscious ass out of there how many times? Once?
One time.
Once was good for you, right?
That taught me that, Dennis, that all this stuff that they train us for is things like that. It is real, and it can happen to anybody.
And even after, I mean, the last time you'd been there 25 or 30 years when this happened, right? I mean, you've been there a long time.
6 years, yeah.
So it's not we're getting big macho da 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 da. It's a real take your life in your hands job, right?
It is, Dennis. And what the point you're talking about at that time, is I was in a structure, and I got disoriented because I didn't have a GPS.
Well, it's black and smoky, and you can't see anything, right?
Smoky, yes. And I realized my air was running low, and so I'm still looking for a way out. And what had happened, in retrospect, the door that I came in had gotten shut, and so I was looking for an open door and it wasn't there, and so at that point, I actually ran out of air because there is only a certain amount that you got. And so through training and the equipment we had, Dennis, I was able to call for a mayday. I did not want to do that because that's one of the last things a fireman wants to do because we are macho, we're above that.
Don't need
But
no help. Don't need no help.
but the mayday is I need help. And so I called for Mayday, and the firemen on the scene knew exactly what to do. And I was out of there. I had already passed out by the time they found me, but I think it was probably within 3 minutes of when I could make the call that I was outside.
And I can't imagine. I mean, Jerry, for you, there was an adrenaline rush. For them, there was an adrenaline rush. Just trying to, this is, nobody yells Mayday until it's dire, right?
That's right. And I actually may have put it off maybe 30 seconds long, too long, because, if I'd have done it before that mask sucked to my face, I may have been a little better. But like you said, no, not me, man, not me.
Well,
But
Jerry, and tell us, and pardon, I apologize for interrupting there, but tell us, number one, what's the most common cause of fire? And number two, this is fascinating to me, Jerry. And when you were an investigator, I know I wore you out with questions, but it's fascinating to me what agency takes over, who's in charge, who does all that. But first off, what's the number one thing? We need to watch for grease cooking fires. We need to watch for electrical. What's the most common thing?
Well, Dennis, actually cooking is the number one leading cause of fires. And the reason for that, Dennis, is a lot of times it's non-attended cooking, you know. So, there's always, someone comes up with these neat little sayings about this to kind of keep in your mind right there.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the phrases there with the cooking fire, Dennis, it says, keep an eye on what you fry.
Yep.
You know, I mean, how clean is that, man? That, don't go in here, you turn the pot on and go in here, and start watching television, and then you hear the smoke alarm going off, a few minutes later, and like, whoa, what is that noise, and possibly, at least burnt the hot dogs up for sure, and and may have even expanded to worse. So.
Well, it's funny you should say that because since you and I talked a few weeks ago when we talked about you being on the show here, we've actually had another fire, unfortunately, here in the village and total loss. And it was because somebody was cooking on the stove, turned around, walked off for a few minutes, came back, and it was fully engaged. And I think it was a she, I don't know, could have been a he, had a grease fire, tried to take a cloth and beat it out, tried to whatever, got significant burns. The cat actually perished in the whole thing. I mean, the building was roaring in just minutes. Now, the fire department was 3 blocks from there. And man, they were there in minutes, but it was still a complete and total gut. And the unit beside it. And in Jerry, for those of us that, thank you, Jesus, don't have fires on a regular occasion, the one thing when I went by, it was one of our THA units, our townhome units. So I went by and just wanted to see what the conditions were. And I don't think I'll ever forget the smell, Jerry. It just never goes away, does it?
It don't, Dennis. And yeah, it you just almost can just relate it to unfortunate circumstance because nothing good came out of it for sure.
Yeah. And, when you smell that smell, nothing's happened well, right?
Exactly. But like you just mentioned, though, unattended cooking, would be one of the leading causes. And then we can get on in back into that into fire safety at your home is have a home fire extinguisher, Dennis. Like I said, beating it out with the rag is just most likely not going to work. It's gonna spread it because now you fanned it. A fire is just exactly like a human, Dennis. And I know you've never thought of it like this. You're like a walking fire. But a fire has to have 16% oxygen to survive, just like a human.
Really?
That's what a human body requires to survive. So, if it don't have 16% of oxygen, it smothers out just like we do. So if you had a grease fire right there and you had the lid of it, Dennis, you put the lid on it and leave it alone. Just keep it on it till it smothers the fire out. It's going to take the oxygen out of it and it's going to smother it out. But if you had a fire extinguisher handy, and you learned how to use it, Dennis, it's a really, really simple thing to use. but sometimes a fire extinguisher is heavier for some people, so make sure you have one that you can handle and control. But we got an acronym called, it's called PASS. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and easy to remember. If you've ever noticed a fire extinguisher, they have a little retaining pin on them to keep the handle from being pushed and discharged, when it's not needed. So, and they're usually retained by a little bit of plastic clip, or something. Well, you want PASS would be pull. You'd twist and pull that pin out of the fire extinguisher, and then you'd aim it at the base of the fire, PA, and then S, you'd squeeze the handle, and then the final S there would be sweep it from side to side at the base of the fire. And Dennis, the fire will if it's within reason, fire extinguishers only have their limits too, depending on their size. So, if it's within its limits right there, it could very well put the fire out. But here's another thing, Dennis, another acronym that we use there. If in doubt, just get out. I mean, these things are really straightforward and easy to remember. So if you can't handle it, get out, Dennis. Life safety is the number one priority. The companies and all the other things, they'll do the rest of it, at the end of the day. But get out. Your life, your family's life, and everything is the main concern.
Well, two things come to mind, and I'm dropping out just a little, so I'm sorry if I'm losing you. Are you back, Jerry? Yeah, that may be my problem. Okay, I got you. Well, Jerry, we have short-term rentals here in the village, and at our short-term rentals, I have these little fire extinguisher cans. They're little tubes of fire extinguisher, and there's not a whole lot of them. But what I'm doing is I want to make sure that those are available and easy to get to, because having a fire extinguisher that's stuck under the sink way back up in the corner that nobody knows where to grab when there's an emergency doesn't do us any good either. What about those little cans? Do they do any good?
Dennis, I'm not really familiar with what you're talking about at this point, but I'm sure it's NFPA approved, and so like I said, I guess my knowledge of what you're talking about may not be real clear at this point, but I would think it'd be better than nothing.
Well,
like if it's out, if it gets
I'm sorry, it's an aerosol can, maybe twice the size of a hairspray can. But to be frank, I've never used it, so it'd be a good thing to test, wouldn't you think?
Well, you'd be surprised, but yes, I think a lot of times you're right, Dennis. We have this fire extinguisher tucked under the thing that's been there for years, and I know that I have one here at home too, and a guy that I actually worked at a fire extinguisher place told me from one time, he said just pick it up every now and then and just shake it, upside down, shake it, he said, because all that stuff is in there, and then it could, it may not expel when needed, because a fire extinguisher, we hope that it's kind of like the the wall art, Dennis. That's just where it stays. We don't ever really plan to use it, and so yeah.
Well, we would never want to. So, I tell you what, and we need to wrap up here in a minute, Jerry. Thank you again, and I'm sorry it's been a chaotic morning and we're having a little technology issue here, but let's go back to you're a fire investigator and you're on call. How does this work? You go from being a fireman that you've done for 25 years or whatever, 26 years, and then you move up to an inspector. What do you look for? What do you see? What's your job?
Well, Dennis, you're right, and these are great questions, and everything does change a little bit from thing to thing. But a fire, it actually it gives you patterns, because a fire, just like I said a while ago, it has to have fuel, and it has to have oxygen and everything to burn. So when a fire is set, it's gonna go for the fuel, Dennis. It's gonna go for whatever else will burn. So you will be able to see a starting point to the fire, which is just unbelievable. But one of these days, maybe me and you can sit down, and go through some pictures of fire patterns and stuff like this. And like if you see it on the wall, you'll be like, well, I can see it, because they're generally a V pattern, because what it's doing, it started down here at the bottom, and it's trying to find more fuel, Dennis. So it's in search of oxygen and fuel. So it actually is pointing to where it just started, a lot of times. So and then, yeah, it expands from there, and everything, and you see at some point, the whole room may be, but still that one point generally is going to come right back to that, so
So it
it's
literally tells a story, is what I'm hearing.
it really does tell a story. It's a great way to put it, Dennis.
Well, and you told a story, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I really want you to tell the story if you would. You told a story about a gentleman that all the power was turned off in his house, but still it burned down. And if you would, and we don't want to mention any names, but you were the police chief on duty, or the chief on duty was just confident something had happened, and you kind of went in and re-engineered and figured out what happened. Tell that story if you would.
Well, Dennis, and you're right. I remember the story we were talking about, and it was I'd gotten called to a fire that they had had a fire about 2 weeks before that. And so they called me out here on the second fire. They didn't call me on the first one because they had decided on what they thought it may have been due to cigarette smoking, unattended cigarette smoke. And so they didn't call me on that. But now all of a sudden, about 2 weeks later, they have another fire at this resident.
Same
And
residence.
same resident. So when I get on the scene, the fire captain that was on the scene, he told me the situation. He said, "Hey, we was here 2 weeks ago, had a fire. There's no power at the house. We, you know, this fire started over here this time. Burnt the whole floor out. He was really really strong, and it was an intentionally set fire. And so, well, I heard him, and I took that a note of that, and then so as I went to investigate, now I'm talking to the occupant of the house. He still lived on the property, not in the property, but he actually had a storage building close to the building, and he said he has been living in that storage building, and so we had talked stuff, and he said, yeah, he'd come home from work one night, and he saw some people coming out of the house, some juveniles, and so he said, well, people, they know that, nothing's going on here and stuff. So he had gotten a drop light from his shop that he was living in, that he still had electricity in that, and he ran his drop light to the house and hooked it in there in the kitchen and turned the light on where it looked like the house was still occupied and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
That sounded like a great plan. Well, as we talked and stuff like this, and I had asked him, where this was and this says, so I'm going in the house, to check, back, to back up his story, and it wasn't there. And so I go back and talk to him again. I'm like, where did you say the light was? And we talked about it. What kind of light was it and everything else? And he told me, and I'm like, I'm not finding it. So anyhow, I went outside and I actually, found the extension cord that was used to it, coming from his place, and it was going to the house. And I come and tracked it up the back door. Well, the fire had done destroyed the insulation on it and stuff, but the copper was still there. So now I'm just following the copper wire and follow the copper wire straight to the hole in the floor. It was on a raised foundation, wooden floor and stuff. And I'd asked him, I said, what kind of drop light do you have? He said 150-watt non-condensing bulb. And I said, wow, that puts out a lot of heat. And so in my mind, what we created, Dennis, is where he had hung the light in the kitchen where it would appear someone was there. The intruders had came in his house, used that light to walk around his house and see what they wanted to take, and took what they wanted, and then they laid the light down on the carpeted floor or rug, and it heated up the rug and burnt the rug, the floor, and looked like an intentionally set fire. And it was not an intentionally set fire, Dennis. It was one of those things.
Unbelievable. And in my mind, I'm hearing, and I don't mean this wrong, Jerry, and this is not about Pine Bluff. I'm hearing you tell me that there was a guy that had a house that he turned electricity off in his house, and then he moved to a shed, and then he ran the power cord over to make it look. You must see all kinds. And to my point, you must walk in $1 million mansions that are on fire. You must walk in sheds that are on fire, and you have to determine where the fire came from in either one, right?
That's exactly right, Dennis. And I think maybe we talked about it before. When someone has insurance on the house, uh, you know, uh, if you had insurance on your house, the insurance people, they've got their own fire investigators on staff.
Oh, so they don't just take your report; they send their own people.
They do not take my report. My
Hmm.
report and their report is supposed to be, independent of each other. You
Hmm.
know, they do when they come to town. A lot of time they will call me, and they will actually interview me because I was actually as a witness too. What did you see? What did you see when you got there? What was going on?
Yeah.
What was people's reactions and everything that I would ask on my first, arrival at a scene. So they would interview me, and they would get my what I saw and what I heard and what I did, and then they would add that to their investigation also. So yeah, and yes, then our investigation would be independent of each other. But yes, they don't just take my word. So yeah,
Well, they should. They know you, Jerry. You're a good guy. They should just let you.
I
Well,
thought, hey, y'all can go home now. Yeah, no,
$3 million structure fire. Oh, Jerry did it. Oh, come on. We trust him. Come on.
these guys that I've met though, Dennis, and I'm gonna tell you, just without even thinking, some of the best I'd ever seen. Just in
Really?
these guys, most of the time, like I said, they had came from fire departments. They had done this, uh, at the fire department level for years, and then they finally got into the, you know, working, off the fire department scene, but in the same capacity. So
Wow. But hang on. And here's where I want to go from this, because this is just the fascinating part to me, Jerry. So you do these investigations, you see how the things line up.
yeah,
So, Jerry, if I was a fire investigator, it's an 8 to 5 job Monday through Friday, right?
yeah, sure.
Right? No, no. And when we were hanging out and had the chance, and you were working, we had the chance. I was always fascinated at what your schedule was. Now, you know that you're going to be on what, Saturday duty? How does this even work?
Well, Dennis, now, I can't speak for all the thing, but in Pine Bluff, we had three investigators. So what we did is we worked on a weekly basis, and we would alternate, a week at a time. So,
But that's 24/7, right?
24/7, Dennis, they give you a neat little phone and stuff, and yeah, they can
So they
pretty
can
much,
track you.
they can get a hold of you anytime in that 7 day period, so yeah.
So what
And
would the typical shift be like? I mean, you'd have a week. So Sunday to next Sunday to next Saturday is going to be your shift. And I'm losing you there, Jerry. I'm sorry. We may have a call. Are you
because
there?
it does change. It does change, all the time. There's really not an atypical type thing.
But I mean, you go to the office and you basically sit and wait for a fire, or what do you do? Do you stay at home till they call, or what?
Well, no, Dennis, in my capacity though, I was actually the fire and life safety educator too. So yeah, I coordinated with schools and things like this because, like we mentioned already, fire prevention is the number one goal of all firemen,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was really a big deal. So we schedule talks, safety talks, and things like this. We would in Pine Bluff, we would go out and actually put on fire extinguisher classes and things like this. We had a neat little a piece of equipment that it didn't use the actual thing, so there wasn't a fire. But we could it would be like we would spray water into a controlled place. So it gave the people the feel of the fire extinguisher and stuff like that. And it
Hmm.
was a good to get people. Some people had never actually picked up a fire extinguisher. They were most of the time surprised by the weight and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And just try to give them some pointers on how to safely use one.
Well, and what I'm trying to do is, and I want to get a feel for, there's not 5 fires a day, and they not a lot of them happen Monday through Friday or whatever. But I mean, you had mentioned one time, I think you had mentioned one time that in a 24-hour period, you had 4 fires. You went from fire to fire to fire to fire to fire, and there's nobody backing you up unless I don't know. How does that work?
Well, you're right, Dennis, and that don't happen every day, thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And but now some of those things that we talked about, they were kind of right there, and it did spread out to the point, to where I could handle it. But if I couldn't remember, we had two other guys too, and they would step up, I mean, they were always, if you need them in any case, if there was
Mhm.
something even on a fire that I was already on, I use them too as a resource too. Hey, what do you think about this? Or hey, you got time to come over here and look at this, and I mean, uh, every fireman that I've ever met just always was eager to, give assistance in,
Pitch in and help. Well, let me go through this. So I can imagine, and I'm hypothetical, probably more fires on the weekend.
Yeah, I never took a poll, Dennis. It just, I just wait till the next Sunday.
No, my point being, there's a Friday night fire. The fire starts at 5:45. The fire department's on site by 6 o'clock. You're on site by, and you stay till, what's just the average?
Well, what you do, Dennis, when you get on the scene, you obviously got to talk to the people around, uh, talk to the firemen. What did you see? What did you do when you get here? Talk to any witnesses. Who called it in? How did the fire department get notified of this? And just start right there at the very ground level. And then when you finally get in, you talk to all the witnesses that ever seen anything, called it in. What did you see? Where was the fire? How did it progress? And then when you finally go in, you back their statements up with what you do see and stuff like this. And then, at the end of it, you take samples of anything. If you think there's a suspicious fire, you take samples, and in Pine Bluff, we send them to the state crime lab, for they would give you the did you have an ignitable liquid or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and so then you'd photograph the whole area right there, So after you photographed everything, that's for your when you go back, and stuff, you're like, okay, this is the photos. And Dennis, they actually remind me one time, and there's always something going to remind me of something else. But I had a fire one time and went over there and took photos and stuff. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks later, I heard this the address again on the radio. One day they had another fire at that, and I remember that address. I thought, huh. Well, I was not on call that week, but the other fire marshal number 2, he was on call that week. And I called him and I told him, I said, hey, I said, I remember this address. I had a fire here a couple of weeks ago. I said, do you mind if I go back over there? Because I've got the pictures. I know what the fire was like. Now you have 2 fires, so you're not really going to know which fire you're going to be investigating right now, because I'm sure it didn't start in the exact same spot. So I knew where the first fire started, what damage it did. I had photos of the whole area. And he said, yeah, that'd be great. So I did that. And in my photos, Dennis, that I photoed everything the first time, I photoed everything the second time, I found a beer can on the counter. And I was looking at my photos, comparing them. I'm like, huh, this is the same counter. Here's a beer can. So I talked to the homeowner. I said, has anyone been in here? Nope. No one's supposed to be in here. No one been drinking. So this beer can is nothing belongs to you. And he said, no, it wasn't. So we collected it, sent it to the crime lab, got DNA off of it, Dennis, and they come up with a name.
A DNA off of a beer can, really?
In a fire that had been, it was an abandoned house, and it had 2 fires now. So they actually picked the guy up, Dennis. We put out a bolo on him, be on the lookout, and they actually, found him. Here, bam, they brought him in, Dennis. And it come to find out, Dennis, he was a construction worker that the guy had hired. He didn't know he had been in there drinking beer, but he about went to jail over that, Dennis.
Oh my Lord.
So he didn't, he was not the guy that may have set the fire, but unbeknownst to the guy that owned the house, this guy had been in here drinking beer, and it just.
So the moral of the story is get your DNA off your beer can before you throw it away, right?
As far as we can with these things. So yeah. So yeah, there's generally a story behind every fire. There's nothing typical.
Well, Jerry, there's pros and cons to every job. I got it. I understand. I think for me, and I'm just trying to put myself in your place for a minute, you never meet, I never, 32 years, you might have met somebody who had a fire and was just, oh, just kind of a good day. Yeah, it's okay. It's like you say, it's probably the worst day of their life, right?
Exactly, Dennis. And, you know, all those things like that, like you said, you know, when you do see someone like that, you have to kind of wonder why. Because, you know, like I say, who can just lost, like I said, their home mostly is their most valued place, you know.
Right. You shouldn't be happy, right?
Yeah, you're usually not happy. So, you know, all those things, you know, would start that investigation kind of even right there, you know, hey, you know, that this guy show the usual, you know, type of, you know, emotion for this situation, you know. I mean, you know,
Does that go in your report? I'm assuming.
well, you know, yeah, you would, yeah. And, you know, a lot of times when you do that, you know, you may want to re-interview them, you know, at another time. Because like you say, some people are a little different, Dennis, you know, and, you know, you might even find out, you know, is this their, talk to someone else, is that their natural demeanor, you know?
Yeah.
You know, because I've generally never met this guy before, you know, maybe nothing does bother him, you know.
Maybe he's just smiling. Maybe he's smiling like Jerry Garganuous 9 times out of 10. Maybe that's what it is.
That'd be the true test, though, wouldn't it?
Well, Jerry, I tell you what, we've run out of time today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Great seeing you again, and we're going to have y'all back out to the house soon, okay?
Let's do it, man.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. We'll talk to you soon.
Hope we made a difference today, Dennis.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks for watching and listening to Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a weekly podcast starring Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Visit the website at hotspringsvillageinsideout.com.